91,
Yeah,
90?
1991. Yeah.
91. With obviously like this dissolution of the Soviet Union. And everybody kind of taking a step back and like giving a second to breathe, kind of like how Eisenhower like takes a step back when he's like relieved from the stress of the situation. And he kind of looks at it. But in our like society now, that's what I was gonna say. You know, like there's all these treaties and like
yes,
you know what I mean, right? All these like
treaties.
Nuclear arms treaties basically like limit what warheads you can have on missiles,
and limit where you can test them,
and how yeah. All these like treaties and contracts basically between a bunch of countries, but obviously primarily the Soviet Union or Russia now, I guess, and
Russia and the U.S.
And they're all like coming to an end. So Trump put an end to two of them.
Yeah, he pulled the U.S. out of two of them.
Yeah, in his 2019 to whatever. Or 2017 to, what was he,
2021. 4 years, right? 17, 18, 19, 20. Yeah, 2021. Yeah, so I was reading, like, just, like, the Wikipedia article on what those treaties were, and they were basically just limiting how many of a certain type of missile you can have. I think it was intermediate range missiles, and the U.S. wanted to pull out of it because they felt Russia wasn't abiding by it. So they thought, hey, we're abiding by this treaty and we don't think you are. And the secondary reason was China. China is like an on-the-rise power after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they're not signed to this treaty.
Right.
So they can develop as many intermediate nuclear missiles as they want, whereas the U.S. is still limited.
Yeah, for sure. And then now there's one more, and it's set to expire next year.
Right. Mr. May was telling us about that. Yeah,
isn't that bonkers?
That's
so
insane.
Like we're sorry, that was kind of like that attached to a previous point.
Yeah,
I just remembered that now. But yeah, that's crazy. Like in today's society, we're closer to ever to going back to the 60s and
to this height of tensions and Cold War with like all these.
You see, like Ukraine too, the
Russia-Ukraine war is like pulling us back there. It's kind of like a proxy war, you know? You have one side fighting, and then NATO and the West is funding and providing weapons to Ukraine. Yeah. Obviously, it's for a lot better cause than maybe some of those proxy wars back then were. Yeah, and then you have like rising tensions in like the Middle East and in Asia with China. China being more aggressive in what they want, and you also have it's not just that the U.S. is politically unstable if we're being honest with elections and maybe some characters that don't quite fit modern ideals. The modern landscape. So how do you think we could de-escalate from this and like take a step back?
For sure. Like there's lots of just unpredictable, like you're saying, like unpredictable areas like Russia and China. We're talking about like North Korea, obviously like places in the Middle East, and there's just lots of tension between like the Americas, I guess, like America and Canada really, and probably some other like NATO countries and those powers, I guess to say. So like I don't know, there's lots of fear still with stuff like that, like our Ukraine like proxy war or like TikTok.
Yes, TikTok.
Right. So like they're stealing our data. Like China is stealing our data.
Like the new fear is kind of China now because they've shifted away.
Technology is not hard missiles, but it's like people's attention and people. It's like the weapon of people.
Yeah.
For sure. And there was a quote that somebody brought up. I don't remember who said the quote because the person in our class didn't say who the quote was from, but it was like fear is the only weapon now.
Fear is the only weapon. Yeah.
Something like that. Fear. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's like we only now starting from this point of like
with fear or something.
We fight wars with fear. Fear is the only thing to fight with now. Fear is the only weapon.
Yeah, I think that was the quote.
Yeah. So like obviously, crazy distraction from these nuclear devices. Like obviously fearful. Like that wipes out a continent. But also fear, like TikTok, like things like that, like stealing your information. So that's like, I don't know, that would be my like modern translation. So like there's actual spying too, like the spying of
like
the CIA obviously still does spying. They're not making coups.
They may not be coups,
overthrowing anything or assassinating
as many people, but
as many people, but for sure, like we don't know what they're up to. There's tons like the CIA budget. Let's look at the CIA budget.
The CIA, most of the stuff that they did in the Cold War, we know about because they chose to declassify.
Yeah.
They deemed it not important anymore. So
As one on the CIA's budget is about 3.1 to 3.2 billion.
Jeez.
With over 17,000 personnel. NRO's budget.
That's crazy.
Someone uses 6 billion. That's the NRO. That's the. I don't know what the NRO is.
What is the NRO? Yeah.
NRO. 6 billion.
Something we can look up on podcast here.
NRO. We'll just do that live.
National
Reconnaissance Office.
Space-based intelligence.
Oh,
damn.
Okay. So obviously another one, space race. That's a good one.
Space-based intelligence.
Just getting help from Google here.
Yeah.
For sure. Like,
Google.
think like there's hundreds of satellites out there. Like they definitely all have cameras. They could definitely all take telescopic pictures.
Even like Google Maps is
cooked. Like you can just like drop into someone's like front lawn.
Yeah, you can read their address like just
there. for sure.
Just there. I think another modern day comparison that we can draw is, so like at the end of the Second World War, or you had in the Second World War, you had the U.S. and the USSR as allies, fighting this collective force of Nazis, which they both agreed was worse.
They're both afraid, and then when they're not afraid anymore,
they're
turned against each other.
And so you can kind of see that again with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Without a collective fear, NATO isn't as strong. Most countries, other than the U.S., have dropped their military spending, and they're getting into diplomatic arguments with each other. Quite publicly. Economic arguments, and they're getting quite public about it. But you
cutting off trade routes and whatnot.
You probably wouldn't have seen that as much during the Cold War because NATO needs to present a unified front against.
That's how they draw
against the USSR.
We're scary if we're one and the same.
And Canada, for example, does not meet its NATO requirement. NATO requires all members to spend 2% of their GDP on military spending, like 1.5, something like that. But they've recently just raised it to like 1.7 something. But they, for some reason, don't meet that 2%. And Canada's military capabilities are not what they used to be.
No, but we're chilling with the U.S., so I think we're good.
Yeah, same with honestly most of Europe. They're kind of. After the Soviet Union collapsed, there's no more of that fear, and people realize, hey, maybe we shouldn't spend 10% of our GDP on military if there's no more USSR. We won. We're the best. So they they reallocated that money to other things they need: education, housing, other things countries need.
It's crazy to me how much economic boom happens during a war.
During a war, yeah. There's the quote that's like.
You're pumping out double the amount of supplies and stuff like that. You're selling them to other countries. You're selling fuel and parts and stuff like that. You're also making extra food. Canada and the U.S. making extra food to fund Britain in the World War II.
I think it's called a wartime economy. You shift all your production from instead of making domestic vehicles, you make armored vehicles now.
For sure. But everything booms from it, which is kind of weird. Or it seems to be everything booms from it. Education gets better. We're obviously teaching our kids to become theoretical physicists. But also our goods are shipping better. Our baby our production of kids is going up. Population is increasing. I don't know how everything seems to do better.
There's a quote out there.
Obviously, you're killing hundreds. People, which is not okay.
There's a quote out there. It's war's good for business, but bad for those who fight in it, or something like that.
That's a good one.
I think I read that in a book somewhere years ago. But it stood out to me because
for sure.
it's a good quote.
For sure.